Zero bones, zero skeleton, not a single verified skull sitting somewhere in Greece, the Vatican, or Spain. And that's not an accident of history. That's the entire theological argument. Today we're talking about the Dormition of the Virgin Mary, what Catholics call the Assumption, one of the weirdest and most revealing fault lines between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And because one good schism deserves another, we're throwing in the Holy Spirit too, because it turns out that argument almost broke Christianity in half over a single Latin word. Let's go. Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onoufios Dovlepis, and together we'll discover the not so frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. Nowhere, and I mean nowhere in the New Testament, does anyone tell you what happened to Mary after the crucifixion. She's there at the foot of the cross. She shows up briefly in Acts praying with the apostles, and then nothing. No death notice, no tomb. The most important woman in the entire New Testament just quietly exits the narrative. Which means that for the first few centuries, Christians did what humans always do with a narrative gap. They filled it in. By around the 5th and 6th centuries, texts start circulating that tell you exactly what happened. The most famous is called Transitus Mariae, the passing of Mary, and the story is genuinely cinematic. Mary is living out her final days in Jerusalem. An angel appears and tells her the end is near. The apostles, who are scattered across the known world doing missionary work, are all miraculously and simultaneously teleported back to Jerusalem on clouds to be at her side. She dies peacefully, surrounded by all 12 of them. They bury her in a tomb near Gethsemane. And then, this is the good part, a few days later, they check the tomb. It's empty. Some versions have her physically lifted body and soul into heaven right in front of them. Doubting Thomas, because of course it's Thomas, apparently arrives late again and gets a literal falling belt as proof. Her girdle drops down from heaven, so he will believe it happened. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this is the exact same basic story, but the East and the West ended up doing two very different things with it. The Orthodox Church calls this the Dormition, in Greek, kimesis, which literally means to sleep. And from the word kimesis, we have the word kimiterio, the sleeping resting place, which was a word that was used for hospitals in antiquity, hence the word cemetery, the sleeping place, because you sleep, you don't die, and then you would be resurrected. The theology is completely upfront about it. Mary died. She was human. She was buried, and then because of who she was, her body was also taken up into heaven and reunited with her soul. Death, then glory. Catholicism got there differently and much later. The doctrine wasn't formally dogmatically defined until 1950 by Pope Pius XII in a document called Munificentissimus Deus. It's carefully and intentionally vague about whether Mary died at all. It says she was assumed into heaven having completed the course of her earthly life, which is doing a lot of diplomatic work to avoid the word died. Why the dodge? Because of a completely different Catholic dogma that the Orthodox never accepted, the Immaculate Conception. In 1854, Rome declared that Mary herself was conceived without original sin, which sounds like it's about Jesus' birth, but it's actually about Mary's birth. She was, in Catholic doctrine, uniquely preserved from sin from the very first moment of her own existence, which then creates a simplistic but awkward follow-up question. If death is a punishment for original sin, and Mary never had original sin, does that mean she never had to die at all? Officially, whether Mary died before her Assumption is left open to Catholic theological opinion. Meanwhile, the Orthodox position never had that problem in the first place because Orthodoxy never adopted the Immaculate Conception to begin with. I think that if you asked anyone in Greece about this, they would have no clue what you're talking about. And to be honest, I think most people don't really know whether Mary died and then her body went to heaven, or if she never died and just went to heaven. It's one of the, let's say, the differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, which would define whether you are the one or the other, but most people don't even know those differences. What do we call Virgin Mary in Greek? We never call her Mary, and we don't stress the virginity part. We call her Panagia, from the words pan and agia. Pan means everyone and everything, hence the words panoramic. We say Pan-American, and agia, the word saint for female saints. So we say Agia Sophia, Saint Wisdom. So Panagia means all holy, the most important saint of all. That's what we call her. Maria is, of course, an incredibly common name in Greece, but so is Panayotis, from the word Panagia for men, and Panayota for women. The feast lands on August 15th, and that's why we're doing this episode right now. And that date isn't random, it goes back to the Byzantine Emperor Maurice around the year 600, who most probably standardized the date across the empire. In Greece today, it's basically a second Easter. That's how big it is. Whole towns shut down. Athens is usually dead at that time. Speaking of Athens, Mary was the one that replaced the virgin goddess of the city, the ancient goddess, Athena. Not Athena, Athena. The name Parthenon, the temple that we have on the Acropolis, actually refers exactly to that aspect of Athena, the virgin goddess. So the ancient temple eventually became the Church of Virgin Mary. For roughly 1,000 years, from the Virgin Goddess, we went to Virgin Mary. That's how they replaced ancient gods with saints. Then the island of Tinos, which is close to Mykonos, famous for its sculptures, by the way, becomes a full-blown pilgrimage site with some people literally crawling on their hands and knees from the port to the church because of a miracle-working icon supposedly found there in 1823. That's during the Greek Revolution, by the way, against the Turks. And there's a generally strange geographic wrinkle to the whole Mary story that most people never hear about. Some people know that. There's a house near the Greek city of Ephesus in modern-day Turkey that's venerated by both Catholics and Orthodox as the place where Mary spent her final years. But that is based on the 19th century visions of a German nun who never left her convent. Multiple popes have visited. Nobody can actually prove she was ever there. It's a beautiful tradition, but archaeologically, the GPS pin is doing more work than the evidence. And again, other people did the work for Turkey to get more tourism today, as usual. I hope you're still here because now it's Holy Spirit time. This one's less cute local tradition and more actual cause of the permanent split between East and West. Permanent, maybe not. There's serious talks about the two churches reuniting actually, and practically the Catholic Church abandoning what's coming up. So if that happens, does that mean you will no longer be Catholic? The core Christian creed, the Nicene Creed as we call it, was hammered out at councils in the 4th century in Nicaea, hence the name of the creed, Nicene, Nicaea, a Greek city which comes from the word Nike, that's victory, or Nike in English, and also in Constantinople, so it was in 2 councils in the 4th century. Ironically, both cities are in modern day Turkey. I mean, come on. Originally, the creed said the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Everyone agreed? Greek East, Latin West, no issue. Then, starting in Spain in the late 6th century, Latin churches began adding a word, filioque, Latin for and the Son. So the line becomes, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. It started as a local original edition, mostly to push back against heresy that was denying Christ's full divinity. But if it comes also from Jesus, it means we have 2 gods. It made sense locally, but then it spread. So ironically, that became another heresy. Theologians in the Frankish Empire loved it and pushed it hard across the empire. Rome initially resisted, but it eventually adopted it officially in the early 11th century, so it took many centuries. In 1014, 1014, it sounds so far away. It's over 1,000 years ago. Pope Benedict VIII allowed the creed with the Filioque to be sung at Mass in Rome at the request of Emperor Henry II. Here's the problem. Nobody asked the East. The wording of the creed had technically been fixed by meetings of the whole church, East and West, together, and the rule was that you don't edit on your own an ecumenical creed. Rome did it anyway. To Byzantine eyes, so to the Greeks, this wasn't just bad theology, although they thought it was bad theology too. It was Rome saying that we can just change the shared rule book of the church without asking you. The Filioque wasn't the single cause of the schism though, but it became one of its most famous theological symbols. This led the Greeks to adopt the word orthodox, orthodoxo, from the words ortho and doxa, dogma, which means literally the correct doctrine. Think about words where we use the word ortho in English. For doctors especially, we say orthodontist, orthopedics. There you go. That's what those words actually mean. So they chose that word to distinguish themselves from the Western heretics. So that's what it was. It's a heresy. Don't tell anyone. Excommunications were issued, and they've since been symbolically lifted. We had Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras doing a big reconciliation gesture in 1965. Keep in mind, this whole thing started in 1054. The schism happened in 1054. So over 900 years later, they symbolically lifted the excommunications. But the split over the Filioque is still to this day unresolved. Most Orthodox churches still recite the creed without it, and most Catholic churches still recite it with it. So here's the thread connecting a possibly dead, possibly not, Virgin Mary and a single disputed Latin word. Both stories are really about the same underlying question. Who gets to decide? Rome kept adding doctrine unilaterally. First the Filioque in 1054 without an ecumenical council, then the Immaculate Conception in 1054. They waited 8 centuries for that, okay? The Assumption dogma in 1950. They waited roughly a century for that one. So Rome gradually acquired the authority to define new dogmas for the entire church, an authority that the ancient church never gave to the Bishop of Rome. The East's answer to almost everything is nothing gets decided without everyone in the room. Orthodoxy rejects that model of universal papal authority. It's not really about whether Mary technically died or not. It's about who has the authority to tell you the answer. That's why the Greeks, as we said, used the word orthodox to begin with, because they never actually changed anything in the doctrine of Christianity. That's why when people ask me about what are the Greeks, which is really funny that people wouldn't know the Greeks are Christians, but specifically what doctrine, I always say the Greeks are Christians. We don't have to use anything else. We use Orthodox just to distinguish from the Catholics. So Orthodoxy is Christianity as Christianity was defined roughly 1600 years ago. So guys, if you're in Greece on August 15th, go find yourselves a panegyri in a village. That would be a religious festival. There will be an icon procession, way too much food, dancing, music, and probably fireworks for a woman whose actual burial location nobody can agree on, which is very fitting, honestly. So see you next time on Not Another Greek History Podcast. And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and comment. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onoufiros Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.